Awesome. Thank you, Hunter. Well, welcome everybody to this virtual meeting of the Sexual Violence Prevention Network. My name is Julia Tyndall. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am the Minnesota Department of Health Sexual Violence Prevention Program Planner. I'm co-hosting today with Hunter Beckstrom. For anyone who needs captions, just as a note, they are available with Zoom by clicking on the CC button, or our captioner Megan has posted the link to the chat, and we will post that again for people who are just arriving. Please feel free to chat us or want to chat one of us to access the captions, or if you need other forms of support.
And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hunter Beckstrom, and I am with the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and I am one of our prevention program coordinators.
Also on our planning committee are Jude Foster from the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault and Mary Hopkins and Marissa Regay at the Minnesota Department of Health. Now, for those new to these meetings, we host 4 quarterly SVPN meetings a year. We have 3 goals for our sexual violence prevention network. First, we want to build understanding for primary prevention of sexual violence. Primary prevention is proactive steps taken so that violence does not occur in the first place. The most effective prevention solutions create a culture that does not tolerate violence of any kind. Culture is constantly changing, and we can impact it for the better by changing policies, practices, and environments in the places where we live, learn, work, and play. During these meetings, we present a wide array of sexual violence topics, and we always connect it back to the primary prevention of sexual violence.
Yes, thank you, Julia. However, that doesn't mean that we forget about victims and survivors, because at the center of all of our work are the voices and needs of victims and survivors, and that is whether we are doing direct services, systems change work, or prevention. And all these pieces are equally important in our work, and all levels need to exist to move change forward while still supporting those most impacted by sexual violence. And our second goal with SVPN is to share resources related to sexual violence prevention. And today we're going to share some resources while also additionally sharing some events and updates and other resources on our SVPN mailing list, which happens to go out every 2 weeks. Additionally, the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, or MNCASA, also shares prevention resources on our prevention email list. And we do also encourage you to sign up for updates from Prevent Connect to stay connected to see what's happening on a national level. And please know that all of our previous presentations for the SVPN are archived on MNCASA's YouTube to access following our meetings.
Now, our third goal is about connection. We hope that this space will be helpful for each of you to connect with other people who are interested in sexual violence prevention. So to help us connect with each other, we want to hear from you in the chat box. Please share your name, your pronouns, and one word to describe how you are feeling today. Part of our goal in SVPN is to spur networking and connections. And so we really hope you can connect with each other today using the chat box throughout these presentations.
Yeah, and I'm trying to figure out a word to describe how my day is going so far, Julie. I know that kind of before that we had joined here today, some of us were talking about how, super excited that it's snowing, others not so much. I personally haven't had to go outside driving in this weather. So I think for myself, that is a huge win as to why I'm kind of enjoying this weather. But my dog, his name's Wally, he absolutely loves fresh fallen snow. So he's just been hopping around and having the time of his life out there. So yeah, I'm kind of excited for this colder weather. And it looks like, we have some folks who are feeling cozy, that it's freezing outside. I do like that cozy idea. Chilly, other folks. What about you, Julia?
I'm also feeling cozy. I think after this, I'm gonna sit down. I've got a game on my Nintendo Switch where I'm a little bear who's building a bed and breakfast. It's very fun. I'm gonna make myself a little cup of hot cocoa and just enjoy the snow falling. Again, I also have the privilege of not having to leave the apartment today, so feeling pretty good about that. But yeah, like many others, my word today is also cozy.
Love that. It's like a Sims, but you're like a bear that's kind of an entrepreneur. So that sounds awesome.
Exactly.
All right, folks. Well, thanks so much for sharing a little bit about yourselves in the chat, and keep that going throughout today as well. But before we actually move on to introducing our wonderful guest speakers today, just a couple of housekeeping pieces here. And of course, as Julia had mentioned, really want to be able to continue these connections being happening throughout our time together. But first and foremost, we do ask to please keep yourself on mute unless you are speaking, and there is a raise your hand function here on Zoom. So if we do happen to have a few folks wanting to share at the same time, we do ask you to use this option, and then we'll call on you to unmute yourselves. But like before, if you do have any thoughts, comments, or questions throughout the meeting today, you can feel free to put that in the chat as well. But with that, I think I will turn it back to you, Julia. Thank you.
Thanks, Hunter. So during the first half of our meeting today, we are so thrilled to welcome Melissa Watchke, who is going to be facilitating a panel of absolute experts on Title IX prevention and response, the present and the future. Welcome, Melissa. I will turn it over to you and to introduce this session and your terrific panelists.
Thanks for having us. This is exciting to be here, and I'm honored to be with some wonderful women. Melissa Watchke, she, her pronouns, from the Office of Higher Education. I'm the Title IX administrator and kind of the sexual violence prevention and response program person at the Office of Higher Education. So thanks for having us. We're going to frame it out in three kind of themes today with in terms of what's happening on college campuses. So looking at the current state is kind of the first frame of question and discussion. The second is going to be kind of what is influencing current state. There's been lots going on in terms of college sexual violence prevention response, a lot of external influences that we'll be talking about, or the panelists will be talking about. And then the third kind of phase or frame is going to be what does the future look like with prevention and response initiatives on college campuses, what's influencing that, and then we'll kind of also discuss the notice of proposed rulemaking that the Biden administration have announced through the U.S. Department of Education, which may kind of reframe or adjust how we respond to sexual violence prevention, intimate partner violence, domestic violence, stalking on college campuses. So with that, I am going to introduce Linda, and the panelists will be introducing themselves.
Right. Good morning, everyone, or afternoon. Never mind that. My name is Linda Alvarez. I am at Minnesota State University Mankato and serve as the director for the Office of Equal Opportunity Title IX, and I'm also our campus Title IX coordinator. So we'll pass it on to Chloe.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chloe Vraney. Pronouns are she, her. I work as the interim associate director at the Aurora Center, which is the advocacy program at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. And so we do response, prevention, and have a volunteer program as well. I'll pass it over to Catherine.
Hi, I'm Catherine Arnold, she, her pronouns. I'm at the University of Minnesota in the Office of Equal Opportunity and Affirmative Action, which houses the U of M's Title IX response. So we do both the formal grievance and investigation as well as informal problem solving when sexual misconduct gets reported to the U of M. And finally, there's Laura.
Sorry, I had a hard time unmuting after all of this time on Zoom. It's still sometimes challenging. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Creech, she, her pronouns, and I work as a Title IX coordinator and non-discrimination officer for McAllister College. We handle all Title IX cases, student and employee, as well as non-discrimination cases. So pleasure to be here.
Zoom. It still baffles me as well that when we can't find out what we need. The first topic is kind of current state of intimate partner sexual violence, stalking, dating violence on campus. So If each of you could generally discuss what you've noticed on campus since returning to in-person on-campus classes, activities, and whether or not there's been increase, or what are the kind of nuances that you're seeing on campus current state. And I believe we are starting with Laura. I think you're the first one that we're going to start with.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll just briefly talk about what I am seeing. I would say you asked if there's an increase or decrease. I've definitely seen an increase in reporting on our campus. You know, we're back in person for the first time interacting, and the campus I'm on is a small private institution. So we're pretty much fully in person, and there's interactions that are occurring. And I also think that there's a stronger understanding of sexual harassment, sexual violence, power dynamics. And so I'm seeing a lot more reports coming in that I typically are some of the, what I would consider maybe early intervention period versus maybe where they had gotten more exacerbated later on. So I'm seeing a lot more reporting early on, where we can do some early intervention, some informal resolution processes when it's appropriate. So sexual, you know, a lot of sexual harassment, hostile environment, jokes, comments, gossip about sexual history. We actually added a question on our sexual violence prevention online education module that asks about, have you received unwanted requests for naked pictures or received naked pictures? And no less than 30% has answered yes to that in the last 2 years that we have put that question on. So we're seeing more of that awareness and more of those reports coming through. So I'll give my colleagues a chance to also comment. I won't get too far in, but we can definitely play off that. So whoever feels comfortable going next, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, so I can go. So not necessarily specific to folks coming back, you know, post-pandemic, but in the past couple of years, I've been at the U of M and working in the Title IX space for a little over 4 years now. And we've definitely seen increases, number one, in stealthing, as it is called. So that is one partner removing a condom during intercourse without the knowledge or consent of the other partner. Definitely seen an increase in that. You know, the fact that there's, you know, a slang term for it is sort of disturbing that it's happening with such frequency that there's, you know, a reason for people to have a term to be referring to it. We've also seen an increase in strangulation. So that has been happening both in the context of intimate partner violence. And we've also been seeing it, you know, cases come in where it seems like there's not necessarily an intent to engage to physically or mentally harm the partner, but there's just a mistaken understanding that if someone is consenting to intercourse, that would be included in that consent without a separate conversation or discussion. And that can be, you know, so negatively impactful to the people who are experiencing that, you know, unwanted and without their consent or knowledge that was going to be happening. And then we've also just seen a significant rise in the emotional distress that folks are facing when they come to our office. That has been coming down a little bit now that things are reopening and folks are getting more social connection, more sources of support. But I would say it's not back to the levels it was pre-pandemic. We're seeing folks come in with really high levels of distress and doing our best to connect them with resources to help manage all the ways they're being impacted by that as they go through a Title IX process, if that's something that they want to be doing.
So again, Linda Alvarez at Minnesota State Mankato. I think on our side of campus, which I failed to mention at the beginning, we do look at matters involving students and employees as well. I think the term we've heard is sextortion. That's the other type of incidents that we've seen rise up, and some of these involved, you know, someone accepting a friend invitation through social media and then engaging with someone in a conversation that later on is, you know, trying to get pictures from them or trying to get them to do certain acts while they are on video, and then threatening to release those and so on. And the unfortunate part is a lot of those involve unknown individuals because they are meeting over social media and so on. So on our campus, that has been one of the areas where our prevention programming and our security office as well has engaged in some activities to inform more students about those types of things that are happening, but also making sure that students know where to report and that those are things that they can also seek assistance for. Usually it's something that's more what we've heard from students. It's kind of embarrassing, and you know, they would have let themselves get caught up in a situation like that, but we want to make sure that they are understanding that, you know, that was a choice that they made without knowing that the other person was going to exploit that on their end. And so wanting to have students come forward more to really share their experience and get some assistance. As Laura and Catherine already said, we have seen us trending back towards our pre-pandemic, but I would say it's probably a little bit higher than we saw previously as far as how many situations are getting reported and how many students have come forward with their experiences, be it to residential life staff or you know, others on campus that about, you know, what they've been experiencing. So I would say, you know, I haven't run a report yet, but I would say we're probably pretty close to exceeding where we were even this past year, looking at even specifically for like our sexual assault data report. We've seen quite a bit of an increase from last year to this year and surpass where we were back in 2019. So.
Thank you all for commenting there. And I should just say to everybody that's on this call, the panelists were very welcome to have this as a discussion. We want to keep it open and casual. So please send in questions if you have them. The panelists will be kind of feeding off of each other too with this. So moving into the next question that we have is about, you know, kind of the impacts, what are the influences, kind of, there have been lots of events that you all mentioned, you know, post-pandemic. There's the new Title IX regulations that have been, the proposed regulations have been released. And then the Dobbs decision that has influenced some of our practices. How have those events influenced George Floyd? Of course, we can't not talk about that as well. Lots of things happening. So how has that influenced kind of your prevention and response initiatives on campus? And whoever wishes to start can start.
I can start us off. I think, so first of all, just commenting on the impact of COVID-19, I think we've really seen during COVID and afterwards intensified mental health challenges, feelings of isolation, especially when a lot of different campus activities or classes were virtual. And I think that's really kind of led into a lot of the emotional distress that many of our offices have been seeing from students. But I do want to comment especially on the 2020 Title IX regs and the impacts that we've seen when working with complainants or victim survivors, as my office does. And there's kind of three different areas that we've really seen those regulations have a really difficult impact for our clients. And those I kind of classify as jurisdiction, rigid definitions, and then interim measures. And so first with jurisdiction, you know, looking at the 2020 regs and how they could only really have jurisdiction over misconduct that happened on campus or with a educational program that was related to the university or the college. So luckily at our University of Minnesota, we created 2 different policies and maintained jurisdiction that we had previously to be able to look at different situations of misconduct that happened off campus, still with students or even in educational programs abroad. And so having those 2 separate policies that cover more incidents was a way for our clients and for victim survivors to be able to seek justice or seek more options, get supportive measures, and be able to still initiate a formal grievance process. But I know initially that was just a big point of contention and something that was really worrisome. And I think it'd be really difficult on a campus that potentially didn't have an additional policy that expanded the coverage of incidents that they could have jurisdiction over. The second point of rigid definitions, we've seen that really with how sexual harassment was defined in Title IX designated misconduct in the 2020 regs. It needed to be severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive instead of 1 or 2 of those things. So that's something that's come into play at different points. Also, this might seem less important, but the regulation for hearings that every party needs to remain on screen in the camera, in the frame of the camera during the hearings, is actually something that really impacts the individuals that we work with. It gets really difficult to remain on screen when the person that harmed you is speaking their account of what happened. And I feel that there could be more flexibility with that. And then the third issue of concern for interim measures that we've seen is that really with these 2020 regs, there could not be interim measures that place a burden on the respondent until the end of the entire formal grievance process, which takes quite a long time. And I think that's caused frustration, for multiple offices on campus, potentially. I think professors sometimes see how that impacts safety in their classrooms in different situations. So, and that's something that even our criminal justice system is allowed, right? Even before a defendant is found guilty, they can be asked and required to follow certain conditions. And so I'm excited to see with the new regulations how that's potentially changed. But these are just some different examples of really how the 2020 regulations in some ways really designed to break down victim survivors, maybe potentially to not continue with the report or to not be able to finalize they're going to the hearing process or going to whatever process follows. And so that's something coming from my office where I work with victim survivors primarily. So it may be different coming, especially from the other panelists who work with respondents as well in a non-biased position.
I can add a little bit to that too, specifically when you're talking about the live hearing. What I've noticed is folks that have started the formalized process where it was a Title IX complaint that would go to a live hearing, the majority, if not all of those cases, ended up moving to an informal resolution process or withdrawing. So that burden is actually quite cumbersome. And so it's difficult, yes, to say in that screen when you're in that, but even getting to that point, going through the relevant evidence, all of everything that's on you up into that point is very cumbersome and a heavy load, and really takes a toll on our students, particularly given what you said about the supportive measures and some of the restrictions that we have around those as well. So just to add a little bit to that, thank you for bringing that up. I wanted to maybe talk a little bit about the impact of COVID-19. And I was talking with our director of our health center, and what she said is that the COVID-19 actually opened up an opportunity to have a conversation about active consent in a way that was really relevant to folks, because now we're in this place where we're masking. And so we have this conversation about masking and asking for everyday consent in that area. And so all of a sudden we have this cultural and community example of what that looks like that we can go back to talk about everyday consent and then consent in sexual relationships. So I thought that was interesting. And it was a kind of a pivotal place. And also on the flip side of that, I think COVID-19 interrupted some of the momentum that was happening when we were talking about prevention, some of the prevention work. I heard from students that etiquette around party culture really got disrupted. And so some of the ways that they were educating, older students were educating younger students about what party etiquette looks like and what expectations are, just having even available phone numbers and different ways in which that was appropriate, that got interrupted. And so that's missed out on. And I know our folks on our campus are looking into the best party model, which you all are going to hear about. Men As Peacemakers are speaking a little bit later. And so that is something we're excited to start implementing on our campus.
I would say for our campus, we have seen probably, as many of you have been challenged to, is that, some of our initial introductions into the university, such as orientation, they're hybrid now. And so there's a part online, mostly online, some in person, and we're trying to just get so much information in there. And so trying to make sure that, students are informed about as many of resources and services that are available on the campus in this hybrid model, when some students may not be frequenting campus as often. So we've certainly seen more traffic and there's more buzz around campus with more students here. I think that's always a challenge. I mean, it's been a challenge for a long time, as far as how do you reach students and how do you, maintain relevant prevention programming and so on with every changing class. But I think that's one area where we need to do some more work on and figuring out, how do we reach those students, especially some of those that may be more online and experiencing higher, their college years more in a hybrid environment versus being able to walk around campus and see poster campaigns or announcements for different activities and those kind of things.
Yeah, I can follow up, just sort of echoing what Chloe said about on the U of M. We have that policy where we have elected to make more conduct prohibited under our sexual misconduct policy than is covered under Title IX. So when we have to explain to folks there's Title IX versus non-Title IX, and you're going to get a notification saying it's one or the other, and there's a chance for appeal, it just seems like there's a lot of hoops, a lot of ways to get bogged down. And, we all know that it is so hard for people to come forward and share their experiences with unwelcome conduct, regardless of any procedural, hoops that we're putting in their way that they need to jump through. So when we're adding that to the process, I think that just makes it even harder. And then a lot of the little specific things around what the notice needs to look like and making sure that our report specifically matches the notice. And we've had instances where there's just been a lot of confusion over whether to notice something as gender discrimination or sex discrimination, and what does that mean, and just all these little things where we've gotten them worked out. It's never taken a case completely off course, but it has sometimes bogged it down and added, a few days here, a few days there, but that really adds up to an already difficult process. And so our hope is, we want to make sure that we're providing due process and fairness to both parties, but we want to be doing it in a way where we're not unnecessarily adding burdens that don't help achieve the desired outcome of a fair process and rights for both parties.
I'd like to add a little bit more to that. I think one of the challenges too is misunderstanding, misinformation. I think that even within our employees have about the process. And so some of the work that we're engaging in is trying to, I'm going to try and see if I can help my sound here, is trying to do some more education with our staff and faculty that essentially gets people to a place without them trying to navigate whether something is Title IX or not, or whether we have jurisdiction or not. It's just get them to these offices and then we'll take it from there. Because I think, some people may hear, well, we don't handle off campus, and then they don't come forward any further, where we do, because, similar to what Chloe and Catherine explained, within our Minnesota state system, we have 2 policies, 2 procedures, depending on, what the situation entails. And kind of speaking to the students and trying to remove those barriers and so on. One thing that we've incorporated on our campus is more of like what we call an initial meeting, or otherwise known as like an intake, where we get some information to at least help us determine what potentially is going to be the process and explain it that way, and get into the weeds at that point, as opposed to trying to get into all the weeds and then trying to take back and say, okay, well, that doesn't apply, because that when we first started off just kind of laying out all the options, that was very, very confusing. And we just have been trying a few different things and just making sure students are getting the information they need, but that it's not overwhelming.
Thank you. We have a few minutes, but I wanted to mention kind of what the future looks like here. So if you guys could talk a little bit either about now the Biden administration came out with a new proposed Title IX rules, so getting rid of the 2020 regulations, some of the impacts with that, and or what in your prevention lenses has been working, and that you see some promising practices within the prevention on your campus. So you could take it one or the other in just a couple minutes for each of you, if we could. And Hunter or Julia, please interrupt if we need to be. So thanks.
Well, I could start out talking about some of our newer prevention initiatives and kind of the direction we're going with our prevention program at Aurora. I think others as well will kind of talk about this idea of social environment shaping as the direction that prevention is going towards. So recognizing that college campuses have a higher risk of sexual violence, basically because the environments increase that risk and there's power disparities that exist in those environments. So taking this idea and kind of analyzing the different spaces on campus, how those spaces are shaped, and then reimagining how they could be shaped, how they could be structured, how they could be regulated with policies around them. So as already mentioned, Men As Peacemakers will talk later. And that's also part of our campus's initiatives of what we're starting to incorporate in our curriculum for the best party model to reimagine the structure and setup of parties so they can be more equitable, more safe. And then also we are working with the authors of Sexual Citizens on the SPACE toolkit, which is sexual assault prevention and community equity. And so it looks at all different spaces across campus, looking especially at the spaces that might create or exacerbate power inequities, and really requires buy-in from leadership, requires buy-in and participation from underrepresented communities on campus. And it's a 4-step process to try to reimagine those spaces and redo some of the structures or policies around them. So we're excited about that. And then another program actually that our office has implemented is called STARSA. So that is the science-based treatment for accountability and risk reduction of sexual assault. And it's an active psychoeducation program for respondents or for individuals who want to learn more and potentially reflect on their own behaviors and change them. And so it's an educational program. It's going to be utilized as a sanction or an outcome, or potentially part of an informal, like a voluntary agreement process, or just self-selected. So it is a program that is supposed to be utilized for kind of lower level offenses, because there's a different program that requires a facilitator with a clinical background, which we don't have in our office. But it's a individualized curriculum created by a facilitator for about 10 to 16 sessions for that individual student to do different modules around education on consent, on those power dynamics, on different things that will potentially encourage them to change their behavior. So we're excited about that as well.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit more about this idea of space, and we're in the middle of, or we just launched our strategic plan and are looking at a campus-wide assessment of our space. And so, and we're also looking to build a new residence hall. And one thing I'm really inspired by, I think it was Meg Bossum at Williams, if you've heard of this, of her or this, what she's done is they were building a new residence hall on their campus at Williams, and she was a large part of that process, and looking at had students look at a map of the space and kind of look at where they felt there was concern or where they felt comfortable. And so that residence hall, actually, the basement was pretty dark, and there was lots of masking potential and opportunity for violence. And so they actually made the basement open up so you could exit through the basement, so it's a little bit brighter. They also, all of the ways in which you entered into lounge spaces. So you would enter where there naturally were people already there. And so that if you needed to have some interventions or some ways that people would be just naturally in spaces, that you would enter into the building. And so I'm really intrigued by that and the potential for that on our campus. And I do think that's where a lot of prevention efforts are going to be focused. I think historically, majority, like 90% of prevention effort, I think is focused on the individual, and we're seeing a shift to look at cultural changes, and to put and center voices that historically have not been centered, and really look at what the culture change will be. And I think there's also just things that we can do to that respect that are low to no cost. So even like a lot of campuses will have large parties or dances. And so how can you educate or teach how to create natural prevention efforts in those? So we know that dark spaces create more of a masking effect and have potential for unwanted advances. So we want it dark, so it's mood setting, but not so dark that there's this potential. But there are also ways to mitigate that is maybe natural breaks in music. And so people can exit the dance floor if they need to. Maybe there's more dessert, so the music stops and there's an announcement of dessert coming out, or having your public safety wear glow necklaces so they're easily seen or able to get to if they need. So those are low to minimal cost, even in how we do some of our programming that we have currently. And so those are some of the prevention and intervention efforts that I'm interested to see how those take off as we look to look at culture change and shift. I'll pause there so more people can speak.
I don't know that we have too much time left, but I'll just add a little bit on, some of the positive things that I think. I've been in higher ed for a while now, and I think one of the things that we've seen with our students is that they're coming to campus with a different vocabulary than when I first started, working within higher ed and talking about sexual violence and those kind of situations. There's more awareness. So as much as the negative has impacted, the headlines and all that, I think that's, the positive thing of that is that people are asking, what is this? Why is this happening? And are coming with a little bit more awareness around that. The challenge there is when they come with misinformation. But I think the fact that, people are even asking and more aware of what those items are, I think create those opportunities for us to really engage our students further with some of this work. And students, they're always at the forefront of asking for improvements to the campus and so on. And I think this is another area where I just feel like there's been an increase in the time, again, that I've been in higher ed, of seeing students focused around these topics that are more societal, cultural issues, on top of all the other kinds of things that, students are concerned with as well.
Yeah, we've seen a lot going on, especially with grad students having much more of a voice in terms of wanting protections from unwelcome behavior. And one of our units actually came up with a little internal survey about norms and then shared that with the group, because it was one of those, the norms were around like, do you text students? Do you connect with them on social media? All those sorts of things. And people could see each other's answers. And, as that has been shared with other units and they've been using it, we've been finding that oftentimes faculty members thought that other faculty members were doing more of like connecting on social media or going out for drinks than was actually happening. So by sharing that information, that makes folks feel more comfortable in setting their boundaries, and it can also open up opportunities for communicating then with grad students and figuring out together like what boundaries people want and setting them in a way. So for example, if professors decided to like roll back having folks be their friends on social media, they can, you know, say, this is something that we've talked about as a department and we decided we want these boundaries. So it's not, I'm rejecting you personally, but this is something we're doing to help establish the culture we want, or just other conversations around. We've had a lot of folks who will, you know, send emails or messages at like 2 a.m, and the person getting it is like, why is this person thinking about me at 2 a.m? That is so uncomfortable. I don't like that. And that person has no idea it was received that way. They're like, I was a night owl. I was sending a message. There wasn't any intent there, but just the more people can share how they're experiencing things to let others, you know, adjust their own behavior so they're not causing those unwanted negative impacts on others. I think that's going to lead in a positive direction.
For kind of mentioning that. One thing we didn't mention and talk about was the NPRM, but I see that we are very close to time. There was one question in the chat about any curriculums. We mentioned, Chloe mentioned the space toolkit and sexual citizens. I think this question was quite answered, but if there's any kind of curriculums that you're in, that your institutions use as far as prevention programming, could anyone share? That'd be great.
I just responded in the chat with a couple of different links and information. So, and Hallie, feel free to reach out. I'll put my email in the chat too, if you'd ever like to connect.
Missy, sorry, you're on mute still.
Thanks, Hunter. And I know we are likely at time here. So what I would recommend is if you all have any questions for any of the panelists, feel free to direct them to me. I'll put my name in the chat, my email in the chat, and then I can kind of refer it out to everyone else. Thanks so much for having us. And we look forward to hearing from Men As Peacemakers too. So I'll pass it back to Julia or Hunter.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists. So Missy, Linda, Chloe, and Laura as well. So if we can offer up just some celebrations in the chat or to hit the reaction button. So just give some gratitude to our wonderful guest speakers today. It was really awesome to see how they were already able to make some of the connections to what Men As Peacemakers are going to be sharing. I do want to encourage our other panelists, if you are comfortable sharing your contact information, just as Haley had that question in the chat, but any other folks who want to reach out and make some more connections as well. But again, thank you so much to our panel. But with that, I am very excited to have folks from Men As Peacemakers share a little bit about their best campus model. And with that, I will turn it over to Noelle and Sean. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Hunter, and thank you to the panel. It's really great just to get some on the ground perspective and hear what's been going on in the different campuses. It's also great to hear from a couple of folks that we have been working with or are going to be working with, and just to get a real clear sense about the uniqueness of each campus community, and yet the similarities and some of the things that we've been seeing as we've done our work over the last 10 years or so with campuses, and just similar things cropping up. And I think we're at the point now where we are able to leverage our relationships, you know, as an outside community-based organization, meeting with these institutions, really hearing about needs, especially the discussion around like centering voices of those most impacted by what we're seeing in terms of sexual violence, as well as the shift towards, yes, the individual engagement is important, but also, yeah, we can actually shape environments and we can shape culture. And when we're looking at campuses as their own unique communities, There's also like little sub communities within that. How do we then leverage those relationships and build off of the sense of cohesion and cohesive values, and really tap into folks, especially students, as they're developing who they want to be in the world? What are their values, and how do we take these values and land on something that's going to create social settings and residential settings where everybody is valued and respected, and where there is equity? So we're going to share a little bit about BEST. We'll talk about the BEST party model. Sean's going to talk about some of the other programs that we have evolved out of a single curriculum that started a decade ago. But just in our relationships with our campus partners, we're realizing how we can apply some of these tools and resources and principles and public health strategies in different settings, so that we can meet the unique needs of different campuses, and we can do it in connection and in partnership. So I'm just going to share. Oh, it says participant screen sharing has been disabled. Is that you, Sean? Are you? Let's see. There we go. Let me pull this up. And get our slideshow started. Okay. Right. So, I should probably introduce myself. My name's Noelle Vollen, and I get to work with Sean Elmquist, and we're both from Men As Peacemakers. And you've heard a little bit about sexual citizens, so we'll touch on a little bit of that. So normally people start out with what is BEST, and we're going to talk a little bit about how does BEST work first, and then we'll get into the different components of BEST and look at how that's been working on different campuses. We had some great insights from the panel, and so I think folks, if you're making connections between what the panel was saying and the stuff that we'll be presenting on, obviously put that in the chat. We do like to hear from all of you. So one of the things that Sexual Citizens hits on when they're looking at this like overall environment, and Chloe got to touch on a little bit about the approach that they're using, but one of the values that they have is that prevention takes many different forms, but it always needs to be grounded in a broad commitment to equity. And I think what I like about this emergence of an awareness and the implementation of the strategy of environment shaping, and looking at the culture, shifting not just the physical environment, but the cultural environment, is this emphasis on equity. And I think that what we're seeing now on paper, especially through Sexual Citizens, we're seeing it put on paper something that BEST has been trying to practice over the years. And so we had one of our partners say that BEST is one way we can put Sexual Citizens into practice. And Sean, I'm going to turn it over to you to just talk a little bit about how BEST works with regard to this statement of, if we're going to do something about campus sexual violence prevention, there needs to be values behind it, and these values need to be grounded in equity. So if you want to share a little bit about this.
Sure.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sean Elmquist. He, him, his. I'm the campus prevention coordinator at Men As Peacemakers. And I've worked at MAP for 15 years, actually, so quite a while. And I've been doing this campus work for about 10 years. As Noelle said, it's, something like Sexual Citizens shedding new light on this kind of idea about how spaces and conditions shape people's behavior and public health outcomes it's a really positive, and it's, I think it's bringing some attention to some ideas that we've been kicking around and trying to push for a really long time. And so it's a really big opportunity to kind of come back to, and evaluate kind of where we are in terms of doing this work over time. That started out as a way to look at reshaping party culture and to bring in some, proven public health ideas around environment shaping and ideas that come out of the spectrum of prevention around culture shift and the way that we, educate providers and eventually move towards policy shift and changing things like that. And essentially what BEST is, a grassroots student-driven way where students can take control of the environments that they control, such as party environments, such as social environments and spaces, living spaces that they share. and reshape them on their own, right? If students are hosting parties, they have an enormous, if there's a group of students who share a lease in a house that is a party house and they throw parties, like they have an enormous amount of control over the policies and practices and environments that exist within that built environment and that social space, right? Which is, part of this just comes out of necessity. It's a lot easier to get students onboarded into a process and become leaders within reshaping their own party environments than it is to get giant university administrations to reshape their built environments, right? The other reason why we focus on party culture is because it's this really important, piece of campus culture that exists in parallel with the sanctioned kind of academic and built environments of campuses. And it informs and shapes larger campus culture and is also shaped by some of those policies. But it's this, for students, it's a really important kind of parallel cultural force, right? So this theory of change, this is the old version of the theory of change, which very much evokes a 90s physical science textbook, which will connect to some of the following slides as we're shifting our thinking more towards an interconnected ecosystem type of model of looking at some of this stuff. But basically, students enter into the campus and they're already kind of sorted into these streams of inequity, right? And some of this will be pretty familiar to a lot of you. A lot of the students that we work with, some of this can still be either something that they're resistant to or something that they haven't necessarily thought about before. But this idea that these structures of privilege and oppression that exist within our society and are therefore reflected within our campus environments create conditions, are a big part of what creates the conditions where we have such high rates of sexual assault and sexual misconduct on campuses. That racism and sexism and other forms of oppression contribute to that and are inextricable from that reality. What best purports to be is this kind of green decoder ring that you see superimposed over the top there. And it's an on-ramp, an intervention where students can be brought into this process of, like I said, grassroots environment shaping and cultural change through shared values, right? And these community-driven values around interconnection, right? And hopefully that can help to reshape a more equitable environment. Can you go to the next slide, Noel? When we talk about these next couple slides come out of this, this is kind of the 2022 update on BEST. Some of you have probably heard about BEST before, and a lot of those same concepts still apply, but we're always, things are always evolving and we're always reshaping it, if not just out of necessity. For me, doing this over and over again, year after year, I have to keep it moving. I have to keep it evolving, just to stay engaged. And of course, students are always shifting. One of the panelists mentioned that students have a whole different vocabulary. And after doing this for 10 years, we used to just try to get students to, we used to just do consent education, just to try to get them to even be aware of what that concept is. And like a lot of these things, like the idea is that once students are aware of what consent is, that will make everybody, that will eventually shift culture, and that students will that will create better health outcomes for students. And some of that is true, but another part is that, students get kind of educated into the language, but it doesn't necessarily apply to their behavior. It's a very slow process, and there are always reactionary elements within any culture, and certainly within campus culture, where students sort of learn this language and then become resistant to it. And I think some of that is reflected in some of the things that some of the Title IX panelists were referring to in terms of trends that they're seeing. So all of this fits into this larger idea of a campus as an ecosystem, right? This is just one example where I kind of slap some labels on the water cycle, and it starts to create a narrative, right? Like, it's true, and I think what this depicts, and something that I've put a lot of thought into, and I'm working on a paper with Lauren Martin at the University of Minnesota, writing about the social reproduction cycle as it exists within campus party culture, specifically within Greek life, where there is, again, one of the panelists mentioned that with COVID, it's kind of interrupted this social reproduction cycle that exists within party culture, where party practices, including ones that help to keep people safe, fail to get passed on to the students coming in, right? And so it's very important. And if you take a 2-year break, it does break some of these cycles, and we are seeing the effects of that, where some of these lessons and some of this mentorship and some of this role modeling is not getting passed on. And so you have students coming in, and their idea around party culture is essentially shaped by media, right? And whereas in the past, there would be older, students on their way out who would be able to be like, actually, that's not what parties are really like. It's not like Animal House or Project X or whatever their frame of reference is. And we need to, we can't swing from the chandeliers, right? We have to, we have to take care of the chandelier, actually, because we made a damage deposit. Just basic ideas like that, are all part of what gets reproduced, not to mention all the ways that students relate to each other and take care of each other, right? So this social reproduction cycle is really important, and party culture and social culture is a really important part of that. And best, hope, the idea is that it will get students to take an active role in shaping that.
Mm-hmm. Sean, on that note, sorry to interrupt. I was going to say on that note too, as you're mentioning, like students taking a role, I think that's also something important to point out too, is one of the things that, we have learned, and now we have this great resource that talks about engaging stakeholders, and that when you're talking about prevention, you're talking about something that's big, right? They call it a transformational project, and that's really because you're getting at these underlying conditions that exist in the ecosystem. Also, those conditions are shifting depending on a pandemic and other things that are impacting culture and environments within this campus ecosystem. And that when we think about stakeholders, it's really a nod or acknowledgement that people play a different role, and that there is an important role for everybody to play. And one of the things that MAP has tried to do through BEST is really engage the students and help them understand that that yes, they are experiencing these social settings and party culture. That's part of their college experience, but they also can be empowered and equipped to do this transformational work. And so it's this nod of like students have a really critical role, but also we're also looking at other folks on campus and other players in this. And it could be administration, it could be Title IX, it could be coaches, it could be any number of the folks that are part of this overall ecosystem. So as you're talking about the social reproduction cycle, Sean, I just want to make sure that we are also acknowledging that you have the professionals doing the work and the administrators setting policy, but then you get down to like on the ground level, what is happening, and student engagement is possible and powerful, and it can create change, and it can be part of this transformation. And so not to lose that aspect of that as well.
Absolutely. Do we have another ecosystem slide? Well, so this is another way of thinking about this. This is from the training that we did with Aurora recently around some best party model concepts, some of the stuff that we're talking about. But again, in thinking about the way that these things, these campus ecosystems emerge, as soon as we start applying labels to an image like this, right, it starts to tell a story, right? So part of what we're doing is reconciling, finding a way to build bridges between the different stories that exist on a campus. That could be within different student groups, that could be within kind of the social culture, the bar culture. Every campus is very different, Every campus has very different dynamics, different groups that have different levels of influence. Students within their own peer groups have influence, which ties into this, some of those socio-ecological model ideas that we're all familiar with, right? And part of what we're trying to do is use party culture, use grassroots student-driven engagement around party culture as a way to connect students, through this metaphor into how social change occurs at the institutional level, right? And so that means looking at policies, practices, but also, like we said, some of those environment shaping pieces.
With the goal too being, you're going to have students for maybe 4-5 years. And so are they going to be learning skills then that they can also take out when they're done with their time on campus? What are they going to be able to take with them when they're just citizens as part of a community?
Right. And I think the last thing I would say about that kind of social reproduction idea is just, when you have a student who's a senior, like they definitely want to impart a certain amount of, there's a lot of lessons that they've learned, and empowering them to actually pass that on in a constructive way, in a structured way, I think can be a really key piece, because if those structures are in place, either through athletics or Greek life, or a more formalized kind of social reproductive process, sometimes that can get lost, and that can all evaporate in a year's time, a semester's time, right? Because people are cycling through so quickly. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what BEST is. We're going to kind of reverse engineer this. Basically, what I've been talking about for the most part, the BEST Party model is a curriculum that's been developed over the last 10 years. It's been refined basically by running it with students over and over and over again, and working with student leaders who facilitate the program, training them, working on different campuses with different groups, targeting the intervention towards different groups and different social structures, and refining it into a thing now that I think is pretty tight and pretty efficiently gets across even some of the more lofty abstract ideas that I so like to favor, but it's not everybody's cup of tea. So it's adaptable, but traditionally it's a 8-hour, usually over the course of 8 weeks, student-led program that goes through this whole process of onboarding students into this process of shaping social environments. Basically by finding out a set of shared values and kind of using that as a compass to drive some of those environment shaping things, right? Not just for the arbitrary purpose of even going beyond just like OSHA type, lighting and exit marking things, although those are important, but connecting that to those deeper values of well-being and community interconnection, right?
Mm-hmm. And I was going to say too, Sean, that sort of ties in with what at MAP we really focus in on building that protective factor of community connectedness, where if somebody is feeling more connected to their support network, they're feeling more connected to a sense of idea and a sense of values, they're less likely to experience harm and they're less likely to perpetrate harm. And that can also be applied to the community level. So when you've got a community that is coming together with a set of shared values, that also is that's a protective factor. Community. Sorry, I just had to admit somebody into the room, but that's also a way to create community spaces, right? So even if we're looking at these little microcosm communities of a Greek life house or somebody's off-campus housing where that's known as a party house, you're teaching folks to you're increasing that protective factor of community connectedness, and you're doing it through these shared values, that sense of cohesion and identity, and a shared sort of belief system. And a lot of students, they may not realize if they are coming in with a solid foundation, and they are open to expanding those values, to really create a community space where like, oh yeah, everybody is feeling safe and connected. So if we're wondering how we can use this best party model curriculum, when we say it's adaptable, here's maybe some ways that we have used it, because we're not, I think our approach is not so much to be like, here's our curriculum, go forth and do it exactly in this way. We realize that every ecosystem is different and needs are different, and your target audience might be a little bit different. And so we created this so that folks can sort of move and shift as needed, but it's still rooted in a specific set of proven public health strategies. So Sean, I'll let you talk about what we've already done with some of our campus partners using the content from BEST.
So we'll focus in on some of the specific different programs, but you know, this slide actually sort of covers a lot of the core kind of pillars of what actually the kind of connection points that really shape social life on a campus. And each of these kind of different parts of campus life have varying degrees of, you know, administrative oversight, right? So in some ways, BEST can be a way to intervene in some of these things and open up the door for conversations that might not be able to be necessarily initiated by administrators or teachers, right? Something like having frank, open discussions about party culture within athletics, for example, is not going to come generally from coaches, although some really make wholehearted efforts to do so. You know, in general, students are going to be pretty guarded about conversations, you know, being honest about their party practices with their coach, right? But bringing us in can be a great way to foster those conversations. And BEST, especially you know, on many campuses, athletics has a huge impact on larger party culture. They're often really powerful influencers and drivers of party culture on campuses. And so we work a lot with athletes in a very targeted way. And often they respond really well to BEST because it's party positive, right? We're not there to tell them that they need to shut down their parties, right? And that can really help. Also, being an outside institution can help as well. We've done some pieces around freshman orientation, first year programming, which is intense, right? We all know about what it's like when students are coming in and trying to squeeze all that training in, but again, appealing to their interest in party culture can be a rhetorical device that can work. Res Life RA training is something that we've been trying to get our foot in the door in for a really long time, because depending on the campus, it's such a huge part of the environments that students navigate. It's such a huge driver of those social conditions, environmental conditions that we're trying to directly address. This last year, we did a Res Life training with all the RAs at St. Ben's and St. John's, which went really well. So working directly with RAs and essentially trying to train them in the way that we would train student facilitators, you know, or train participants in BEST, you know, so that they can view their role more as an environment shaper, look at the bigger ideas around their role. Greek life is a huge part of our work. I have a really strong interest in Greek life because it's such an amazing example of like how policies, you know, policies and social reproduction that's been passed down for sometimes 100 years, right? That shapes these environments. And the thing that's really cool about Greek life, although it sometimes gets a bad rap, in fraternities, there's a lot of intentionality that goes into environment shaping and policy. Not always for the best, but it is an example of a place where there's a lot of policies and practices in place that are formalized, and that actually can be a really big opening for looking at how those policies and practices might actually reflect those anti-oppression values. And off-campus housing, we're doing a best training with students who are applying for off-campus housing at St. John's and St. Ben's. That's been going really well. And that's another really great student population to target, because off-campus housing is often where parties are happening, right? And depending on how limited that housing stock is, it can be a very concentrated, sexual citizens, they talk about sexual geographies. And, I think that's a good way to think about it. And when you think about off-campus housing on many campuses, that literally it's a map. If you made a heat map of sort of where parties are happening, from this sort of Google satellite image view, off-campus housing is a hotspot for sure. So that's something that we're excited about working on.
Yeah, and I would say too, as we're talking about all the different ways that we've been able to implement BEST and the content from the best party model and apply that to different settings, is just acknowledgement that all of our campus partners that we've worked with, there's been some similarities, similar trends and things that have emerged. But then there's also some differences. And so our goal is to really work with each campus and also acknowledge like MAP's role as an outside organization coming in can be really useful. And at the same time, we realize that our role is to come in and bring some tools. Sometimes it's our role is we'll talk a little bit about some of the focus groups we've done, but it's to come in and students are a little bit more open with us. So if you're wanting to get a better sense of the landscape, what's really going on on the ground with students, sometimes it helps to have an outside party. But on the other hand, looking to implement this sort of a training, we need our campus partners, right? So if you're going to do off-campus housing and you want students who are going off campus to also have this training in environment shaping and having some shared values and equity, we can't come in and set a policy and say, you need to go through this training if you want to up your chances of getting off-campus housing. That would be something that our campus partners would do. And so there's different roles that, we look at the ecosystem, there's different roles that MAP plays, and there's different roles that our partners play. And being able to navigate and negotiate all of those nuances that's one of the strengths of the BEST program. So that's just a list of some of the partners that we have had so far. And I realize we've got about 5 more minutes, Sean. So I want to also get to some of the other things that we've done, and so that you can talk about a newer component that we've had, which is around the alternative response for when something happens. So we have done consultations. We'll love to connect with you and sit down and in a virtual space, if that's more convenient, and just kind of talk through what needs are. Sean's done a lot of presentations. We have a team of presenters that can work with Sean to do this. We've done trainings, the actual trainings with coaches and staff and student volunteers. And then what we want to do is not just say like, here's our product, take it and go forth, good luck. But we operate from a practice of connectedness, and knowing that at an institutional level, when we're connected, that is better at ensuring success of implementation. And then, okay, we need to adapt something. Great, we can do that on our end because that's our role in the ecosystem. So there's that. And then Sean, I know you mentioned it, but just to point out, all of these things are new, right? Even community level prevention is sort of this field that's like still emerging, and we have these best practices and these models that we're using, but okay, we want to know what impact is. And so some universities have been interested in the research, the evaluation aspect of that, and so are we. So to the extent that we can partner with you on that, that's something we're interested in. And Sean, you're already doing that work with Dr. Laura Martin too. So that's just to mention that this is all part of how BEST does its work. But Sean, there's like the focus groups and then the alternative response that I wanted you to touch on before we sign off here.
For sure, yes, I feel the time crunch. So the focus groups is a really important diagnostic tool, because we really do kind of, what we really want to do, as opposed to just sort of superimposing the best party model, and it's like, take this manual, is connect the dots and connect those different stories that are overlapping and intersecting. Focus groups are a really, really good way to do that, especially going into a campus that we're not as familiar with. Like I said, every campus ecosystem is different. So we do targeted focus groups with student populations, and those are so helpful in shaping our programming, right? And so we'll write up a report, and then the campus can make decisions, our campus partners, and they're the ones who can move things around and make things happen. And again, we can be there as a sort of outside force to be like, this is what we're seeing, and this can help move things forward. Sorry, go ahead. The campus inventory tool is a new thing, mostly developed by Noelle. You did a great job with this. This is a web-based tool where campuses can take stock of where they're at, which will help us strategize with them about how we can integrate some of what we're doing to help move prevention forward on their campus. It's a really useful diagnostic. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on is a relatively new thing in alternative education, informal response. Chloe mentioned the STARS program. I think, in some ways there's some overlap with that. I think what maybe makes our approach unique is, Men As Peacemakers has had a longstanding restorative justice component, and a lot of programming around, usually around, most of it has been around DV stuff. I, as well as doing campus stuff, have done quite a lot of facilitation of those programs at Men As Peacemakers. And so I have a strong interest and a lot of experience with restorative justice ideas and concepts. And then basically what we're trying to do, what we are doing, is applying that to our own kind of alternative education. And so it's a kind of a hybrid of working with individuals to kind of, on an education piece, to help them, find some accountability and create conditions where they can be safe around, where women and students, that have been impacted by their behavior can feel safe around them. And also, pulling from our kind of restorative justice paradigm stuff and in ways to find some accountability, I guess.
And that's a 5-session program. Currently, the way it's set up, Sean, you've been meeting one-on-one with students that are referred to you. So we can share a little bit about what our campus partners are doing in terms of a referral process. And in the future, ideally, we'd be able to train campus staff to be able to use this on their own if they don't necessarily want to partner with MAP to do the one-on-one sessions, if they want to do those sessions in-house. But I will say, just so you know, this is something that came out of discussions with advocates and survivors. So community-based advocates, that where students were saying, I don't want to go through the criminal justice process. I just want them to know what they did and not do it again, like learn how to not do it again. And so really building off that expertise that MAP has around restorative justice, but combining it with prevention and that sort of shift in attitude and thinking around relationships and consent and sexuality, all of this kind of combining what we know to work with students. And that was, again, to meet a need that our other partners that do advocacy work with survivors have said, we want something like this. So here's our contact information. We went over a little bit, so I'm going to turn it over to Hunter and Julia, but thank you so much for letting us share. We appreciate all of your time.
Yes, thank you so much to Noelle and Sean for a truly and absolutely wonderful presentation. So again, if we can give some celebrations in the chat or hit the reaction button, it was awesome. I feel like this is probably the 4th best presentation I've been through, and every single time it changes and there's something new to learn every single time. So I truly enjoy it. And I also do want to apologize. I feel like we only hit the tip of the iceberg on both of these general presentations and guest panelists that we had today. today. So hopefully in the future with our SVPNs, we can dive into more of this even more in the future. But just a couple of last things before we sign off today. We would love to just open up the space to see if anyone did have any announcements. As always, want to be able to make sure that people can kind of share some of their events or important pieces that is going on within their programs. So I'll just give it a minute while folks might be typing something in the chat or retrieving some links. And Julia, if you have anything, I would love to hear a little bit from the Minnesota Department of Health as well.
Thanks,
And with that, it
Hunter.
actually
Yeah,
looks like Mary raised her hand, sorry.
no worries. Mary, I'll turn it right over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, what an awesome SVPN meeting. This is great. Hi, everyone. I'm Mary Hopkins. I'm the Sexual Violence Prevention Program Director with the Minnesota Department of Health. And I wanted to give just a quick pitch for the Eliminating Health Disparities Initiative, RFP. So the Center for Health Equity at MDH. Julia and I both put the link into the chat. This is a program that is targeted to eliminating health disparities in a number of health areas. And one of the priority health areas is violence. So they have funded sexual violence prevention in the past, and we do hope that some folks will consider applying to this really great grant opportunity here for the state of Minnesota. They're currently funding some sexual violence and domestic violence prevention initiatives. So check it out. The link's in the chat. You can reach out to us also if you have questions.
Fantastic. That sounds like an awesome opportunity. So thanks to Mary for sharing that in the chat. While we're just giving folks a couple more minutes to brainstorm and think about any announcements, we do have another ask, and that's just a quick poll question that we wanted to offer to you all. And so I am going to launch that in a minute. So this is a quick evaluation poll that we would love to ask you all about. And so Julia, if you want to take the reins for this, it should be launched.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hunter. So all of you should see a question that came up on your screen. This meeting helped me, and you can choose multiple responses to this question. Your options are gain knowledge about Title IX, gain knowledge about sexual violence prevention on college campuses, learn about a resource, identify someone to connect with, think of an action you can take based on what was discussed, or other. If you have any other things that this meeting helped you to do, we would love to hear from you in the chat. And we would also love for you to take a moment to share in the chat box any questions or requests you have for future SVPN quarterly meetings. You can also send the suggestions to me or to Hunter, and I'm about to pop this question in the chat as well as our contact information so you can send us a private email. But again, just if you want to answer that polling question and take a moment to share with us either if there were other things that you gained from this meeting today, or if you have suggestions, requests, or ideas for future meetings. We love to hear from you all.
And thanks so much to the folks that were able to share on the poll. It looks like we have about close to 80% of folks have shared. So I'll probably shut that down in just a couple seconds here. Thanks again so much, folks. Just want to make sure that we get that information here.
Yeah, and in the meantime, I just want to say what a cool meeting this was today to hear from our great panelists and participants, and from Melissa from Office of Higher Ed, and from Noelle and Sean. And, I want to give a shout out to Melissa's great newsletter that she's been releasing through the Office of Higher Ed. Just lots of really cool opportunities for all of us to collaborate with one another to do really exciting sexual violence prevention work across the state of Minnesota. It has just been a real pleasure to learn with all of you today.
Wonderful. Well, I don't know if I can say it any better than Julia just did it. So with that, I just want to offer us up a few more minutes, but please do not hesitate to reach out to myself, Julia, folks who were our guest speakers today, or anyone else from the Minnesota Department of Health as well. So stay safe outside today. I know that some of us got some weather, but thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your day, folks.